Welcome to Anatomy of a Strategy. My name is Tara.
And I'm Carlos.
And today...
Who are we talking to today?
We are talking to an old friend of mine, Alex Hillman. For those of you who do not know who Alex is, he's in Philadelphia. He is the local, community rallier there. He has written extensively on how to build a co-working business right. He is also my co-conspirator on a karaoke road trip I did across America a bunch of years ago.
Obviously, I sat back a little bit on this one because you guys go way back, but it was a really interesting conversation about all the things that Alex does, which is a lot. The way he thinks and the way he's building his companies are sort of very unique and very grassroots, I guess. Right?
Yeah, and I think the biggest lesson here when we're talking about an anatomy of a strategy is what Alex preaches is don't do this one big thing. Right? What you need to do is, and whether it's as an individual or whether, you're a business or whether you are a group of businesses or a city that is trying to encourage growing jobs, diversify what you're selling and what you have out there. So don't just focus on don't put all your eggs in that one basket. So if you keep on listening, you'll hear him talk about how the Amazon bid that was happening last year that basically created a whole bunch of angst across North America actually created something kind of cool in Philadelphia as well.
Exactly. Enough of us. Let's get to it.
As a community builder and a co-working pioneer, Alex is always thinking about the intersection of people, relationships, trust, and business. He founded Indy Hall in 2006, making them one of the world's oldest fully independent co-working communities. Long before we work. It's a completely bootstrapped and self-sufficient business and continues to thrive in Philadelphia. He's also helping aspiring co-working entrepreneurs, runs a product-based business with Amy Hoy called Stacking the Bricks that sells ebooks and courses that help entrepreneurs do what they've already done successfully. And that's just the beginning. I'm not going to go on because I think Alex can probably tell his story a lot better. Welcome, Alex, to the podcast.
Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. It's so nice to spend some time with the two of you today.
Yeah, and just for anybody who does not know this, Alex and I know each other pretty well. We've known each other since before 2006, I guess.
Yeah, we met around that time, and Indy Hall in a lot of ways was inspired by Tara's work in San Francisco and creating Citizen Space, which I credit as one of the first dedicated spaces in the world. And so we've been friends since then. We also we're karaoke RV friends. We've traveled together.
Yes, we did a karaoke road trip across America. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about what that was about.
We have some history, though. It's true.
Trip down memory lane. Yeah, we all slept in an RV together, almost died in the Las Vegas desert.
Oh, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
It was kind of that bad.
She makes it sound like it was the end of the world.
Yeah. But overall, I know you really well. Carlos knows you really well. But you are a tough guy to describe. So even though we've known each other for years, please do talk about all the bleeding edge type projects that you work on. How do you describe what you do?
It is the most impossible question because the shortest version is I'm an entrepreneur, and I hate because I can say that, but it's not my identity. I don't really identify as an entrepreneur, although you could look at my work history. I've worked for myself for the better part of 15 years. I don't know. I think the best way to describe me is emotionally unemployable. And in my entire career, I've always looked to carve out my own way. I've worked for agencies. I come from a background in technology and web development, so I think that's important and relevant. Although I don't really identify with that either. That's just sort of a tool, part of my tool chain. I love helping bring people together. I love helping people understand their goals. I love helping people achieve those goals and to achieve those goals together. That's probably the shortest version of who I am and what I do. And the through line for everything is bringing people together to achieve things that they couldn't have done on their own.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have so many projects, as I just mentioned, but let's start with what you built in and around Indy Hall in Philly. I think when we met, we were working on a project together. You weren't working on Indy Hall quite yet. You came out to San Francisco. We tried to recruit you, but you were like, nah, I'm going to go back to Philly and build what you got, because we had, I think we had Citizen Space launching at that point, and you were like, I'm more interested in seeing what you did here and bringing that back to my hometown. So talk a bit about, how you mobilize the community, what you build. I mean, it's pretty impressive. It's huge. Like, where are you at now?
So today we have a shared co-working space. Our community is around 450 members.
Wow.
We've got a big, beautiful sort of clubhouse type workspace. But I always remind folks when they walk in today, like, this is the result of 13 years of work. If you rewind the clock all the way back to the beginning of the story when you were describing, I was a lonely freelancer working in my bedroom. I didn't even have a spare bedroom. I had a desk in my bedroom. So the distance between getting up in the morning and starting work or ending work and going to bed was maybe all of 2.5, 3 feet. But the real problem that I had then was that I had left a full-time job doing web development, which I enjoyed the web development. I didn't so much enjoy my boss, like I said, emotionally unemployable. But I really did enjoy the work. I loved the creative part of the work. I enjoyed the collaborative part of the work. And when going out on my own, it was sort of the best of being able to choose what I worked on, who I worked with, who I worked for, when I worked, where I worked, it was my show. I had to serve my clients, obviously, but it was my decisions. The one thing that I was missing was coworkers. And I was very fortunate to have worked at an agency where there was this culture of learning and sharing and connecting. And I don't think if I had worked for that company, I would have even known that it was possible to then miss it. But I did. And I started seeking those people. And some of those people I met online, that's how we met. I was finding people with common goals and values who made things on the internet, who shared things on the internet, who wanted to learn and teach what they learned and things like that. And so I was building
IRC at the date of
IRC, Skype chat rooms. We hung out in Skype chat rooms, which is a weird thing to say now. So the tool ecosystem was so different, but the desire to connect hasn't changed. But I was still missing sort of that local ecosystem. There was never mind a co-working space. No one knew what a co-working space was in 2006. There was also no meetup.com. So any meetups that existed were, organizing via email lists, I guess. And there was very, very little. I don't want to say there was nothing, but there was very little.
Evite. There might have been something on Evite. I don't know.
Yeah. Upcoming.org existed, but there was basically nobody using it in Philadelphia. So so I was watching what you were doing in San Francisco and what some other people were doing and saying, why aren't people organizing like this here in Philadelphia? And then I thought, well, if no one's doing it, maybe I should do it, which may be another thing about me that shows up as a recurring theme. And so I started finding those folks one by one, and one meeting over beers and chicken fingers would turn into a small group of people going out on a Thursday night, would turn into a handful of people going to somebody else's event together, to us running our own weekly gatherings where we would take over a cafe. Instead of going to a cafe by ourselves, we'd say, hey, we're all going to this cafe on this day at this time. Come and join us. And eventually that club was interested in a clubhouse. And that was where I started borrowing ideas from Citizen Space and a couple of other early co-working players and said, I think we've got a version of this that could make sense here.
I remember that early space. Yeah, with the balcony sort of upstairs.
Yeah, it was, our first location was an 1,800 square foot split level loft. It was, and my backup plan was if this co-working thing doesn't work out, I'll find a roommate and we'll just live here. It was tiny. It was a tiny, tiny space, but it was home. And as soon as we had a door that people could walk through, more people kept walking through it. That's just the rest is history.
Yeah. Amazing. So those early days, but that was a small crew. And then I think I came back that's when I actually pitched the karaoke road trip. What year was that? Yeah, 2009. I came back to celebrate your anniversary. And there was quite a few more people, and you were in a bigger space, or you were just moving into a bigger space.
We had just moved in. That party was actually to celebrate moving into our new location, which was about 3 times the size.
Yeah. I remember taking pictures of people carrying furniture, I think, down the road, because it wasn't that far from the first one.
Right around the corner.
Yeah. And so that was 3 years later. And that was a big step up. I was like, wow, this is amazing, growing. But the growth from there to now is like,
yeah, I mean,
how do you scale that?
So it's a really good question. And I'd say, growth of something like what we do, where people are at the center of everything that we do, it is hands down the hardest challenge. People see what we do and they correlate us to a real estate business because, we hold a pretty significant lease. If you think, most people think of Indy Hall if they've never been a part of Indy Hall, and they think of our co-working space. Meanwhile, people who are part of Indy Hall think of Indy Hall and they think of the people inside of it. And so the answer to your question, how do you scale it, is we focus on the second half of that equation and making it so that every new person who walks in, if the thing they're walking into and they're seeing the physical space, we put all of our effort into reminding them and showing them the value is not in the space, it's in the connections between the people. We still to this day run with a tiny team as well, besides myself, and I don't work on Indy Hall full time. There's two folks who are on my team, and it's their job to be that support, that on-ramp, that
host,
that guide, that host, to help people find their way in and find where they find their sense of belonging, find ways to contribute. A lot of other co-working spaces of our size in terms of physical footprint have staffs of like a dozen. And I tell them that we run on two people, and they're like, how? I said, well, we're not a service business. We never were. And we didn't lose sight of the fact that the greatest source of value that can be created is the connections and relationships between the people. And the beautiful thing about that is if you think about every other kind of business, whether you're talking about a service business like an agency or a consultancy, your growth, you have more clients, you sell bigger projects, you need to hire more people, so your costs go up because you're effectively selling time, even when you're packaging it in different ways. So growth is linear in that way, growth and cost. If you think about a physical product, if you create 1,000 units of a product and they all sell out, you've got to go buy 1,000 more units so you can keep selling it. You might get some economy of scale, but more customers in both a service and a product business, more customers typically means more cost.
Right.
In order to create the thing that is valuable. In our business, the most valuable thing is the other people, which means every customer is also adding to the potential value for every other customer. Making sure that we know that, and our sort of the network effect means that every new customer who comes in means the potential value for every other customer goes up. That's how you scale. And by staying focused on that and less focused on services, we've been able to get to where we are.
Yeah, and so that would require like a ton of work up front, but then I've always loved the whole like teach a man to fish model, right? So what we wanted to do with our co-working space, and you've embodied, and I would say most co-working spaces around the world, especially the independent ones, have also embodied, is this idea of like, we're going to show you around, we're going to show you how to make the coffee right, how to do this right, how to do that right, but everybody should treat this like it's their own home.
Yeah.
We all pitch in. We all like, when we see the coffee's empty, we make, you make the next pot, like
the reality is that it's never going to be all. I wish it was, but that's, that's just, it's not utopia. And I'm not,
well, especially when you get as big as
reality. True. Even when you're smaller though, I think the key is that some people, enough people, or whatever enough needs to be. The analogy that I always use, and I think people see Office and they have like a really hard time disassociating certain patterns and experiences from an office because they've worked in offices or they've seen offices and things like that. If you think about a neighborhood and you move into a neighborhood and a neighborhood feels vibrant and connected and like home, what makes a neighborhood feel like home? Is it because somebody comes along at 3 a.m. and cleans the streets? Or is it because once a quarter, the neighbors get together and clean the street? So that sense of contribution, I think, is directly correlated to a sense of belonging and the things that make a place feel like home. You have to design for that, though. If you and you have to be careful what you add to it, that it doesn't actually detract from those opportunities to feel that sense of belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've obviously Indy Hall has become super successful in the way that it sustains itself. It scales. I mean, it's still going to be work. But that's not your main, well, I mean, it's one of your main businesses, but you have many main businesses. You have another one. And that is stacking the bricks.
Yes.
You'll have to tell me a little bit about the analogy behind that, but it's you and Amy Hoy, right? She's
That's right.
A brilliant UX designer, although I don't know if she'd describe herself as that, but she is. That's how I got introduced to her. I watched her give a talk many years ago that blew my mind on UX, like really good UX. I guess both of you having successful businesses, whether it's a consultancy or a co-working space, we're able to come together and then create products to help people learn what you've learned over the years.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the early days of that
sure.
and how that came about?
So Amy and I have been friends for almost as long as you and I have been friends. And you're right. Amy and her husband, Thomas, they also ran a consultancy like I did, doing software design and development. Amy is both a designer, a developer, a writer, and an entrepreneur herself, a businesswoman. And so they had been consulting and started making the shift into selling products as well. So Amy was, as she would tell the story, completely fed up with consulting and did not want to work for other people anymore for a myriad of reasons, including, when you do really good work for a client and then that work never sees the light of day. When you're a creator, I'm looking at your faces. Like when you're a creator, there's nothing more disheartening, even if you've been paid to see your work just sit on the shelf and collect dust, or to watch your work get systematically torn apart, destroyed, dissolved. And so she couldn't put up with that anymore. And so she wanted to start building her own products. They had launched a couple of free things that had gone semi-viral, and said, maybe we can create some tools of our own. And so her and Thomas built their first software as a service, which was called Freckle. Recently was renamed to Noko, N-O-K-O. And that was the beginning of Amy realizing that her future was in selling products, sort of systematically decoupling her income and her income potential from trading time for money, and slowly weaning herself off of products. Indy Hall, in a lot of ways, had followed a similar path where I'd started it as a consultant and then had built this business on the side. And as it grew, I realized, there's something going on here. I wasn't actively running away from consulting like Amy was, but the thing we had in common between our approach was Amy didn't pluck an idea out of thin air and said, this is my great idea. I'm going to go create this software and sell it. In the same way that I didn't say, I'm going to start a co-working space. I'm going to open a space and go and find people for it. The thing we have in common is we start with the people. We go out, we find those people, we build those connections, we build those bridges. As you said, your method approach to research, getting immersed in those communities means we're a part of those communities, and then we understand those people's problems better, sometimes better than they do, because we're coming in from an ethnographic research perspective. And then we earn their trust, and then we figure out what we can create that they would actually pay for. And when Amy and I started sort of bonding over that methodology as sort of a contrast to the way startups typically work and the way a lot of other people try to launch products, where they say, here's the brilliant idea. I'm going to go away for 6 to 9, 12 months, maybe raise some money to build a thing. And then when I launch it to the world, they're going to love it. And then when you launch it to the world, nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
We're like, we had both consistently found things people wanted and would pay for by immersing ourselves in those communities. And then we used the skills we already had to make the first version of those things and launch it. And so we thought to ourselves, why aren't other creative people doing this? What are the things that people either don't do or they do incorrectly so that on launch day, they don't have paying customers? And we developed the first version of a curriculum around that. Actually, if I back up a little bit, Amy had launched Freckle. Freckle had paying customers, and she started getting emails from friends and colleagues in the ecosystem saying, hey, like, can you answer this question? And so she did the very first version of our course was not a course, and I was not in the picture, was a call. I think she charged like $79 or $99 for, had less than 10 people on it. And she spent 3 hours going through essentially an outline of like, here's what I did. Here's what I learned. Here's what I would do differently. Here's what I would never do again. Here's what your takeaways are. And at the end of that, people are like, we want more. That was when we sat down and said, let's turn this into a curriculum, started answering those questions. And in 2010, I believe we launched the first version of what would be 30 by 500, which is our flagship course that teaches creative people how to do the research that we do, how to distill that research into insights and actions, how to use that to fuel marketing, content marketing, outreach, and then eventually use it to create product and even use it to create persuasive sales copy for people who don't consider themselves sales copywriters. So it's been almost a decade since that. So that course has also been, we've rewritten it 4 times, maybe 5. But the most current version that we run today is a self-guided course. It's about 40 hours worth of actual coursework. And then, but you can go through it on your own time. So it's videos and exercises and things like that. And we have about between 400 and 600 students going through that program annually now.
Wow. Yeah. And so just to sort of veer into that a little bit, not to make this about us, we're building our own product called Flywheel, like PHLY wheel, like it's just kind of silly, but it's also fun. I think people will remember it. Plus that we're having a lot of fun with 90s graphics. But similarly, like you sent me your Stacking the Bricks tool list, which has been bookmarked now in my browser, and I go back to all the time because I first looked at this tool list and I was like, oh, that's a lot of tools. You don't need that many tools. And as we've been building, I'm like, oh, I wonder what Alex used for this. And so I keep going back and I'm like, oh, okay, Podio. Okay, got it. Oh, what about an education? Oh, Teachable, so that sort of thing. Because it definitely helps. Although you said you weren't super happy with Teachable, I will have to ask you about that at another time, like where you are now with that sort of thing. But that in and of itself, all of this really great research that you did, and you probably went down that path, I would imagine, where you tried all of these different things and you saw what worked, what didn't work.
That's right.
And you then settle on what works the best. And just that is so valuable for other people. Like that's time you save them. So of course they should pay you for that resource because, and it's kind of like what we're building into Flywheel. Everything that we are teaching people are things that we went through all this rigmarole, so you don't have to.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the stuff like the tool list, for instance, is a great example. And a lot of the stuff that we put out for free like that is intended to save you time, save you headache and heartache, help you better understand a problem before you even ask a question about it, or rethink the answer once you've come up with it. If you sort of read through our articles, one of the sort of core tenets that we teach in 30 by 500 and we execute in our own businesses is that our content marketing is decidedly not news of the day, link lists, roundups, and stuff like that. It is meant to be things that are explicitly going to be valuable to a reader. Maybe not every reader that you have, but everything that we ship has an associated fix that ties back to a problem that we know our audience has. Right. So we never have to sit down and go, what should I write about today? Even if you're asking, what should I write about? You're already asking the wrong question. Right. The better question is what does my audience struggle with? And how can I save them time or money doing that? Yeah. And so we'll create content, whether that's a written article or a video or a webinar or a podcast episode And we come at everything from that perspective. And in that way, our marketing content, we approach the same way as we would a product. A free piece of blog post, people are like, it's a blog post. It's a throwaway. It's just to get people on the website. No, a blog post is a product. It's a tiny free product that delivers value like your core product should. It's just much smaller. And therefore it's shareable, because if somebody reads it or watches it or listens to it and then they try it, they try it and they go, whoa, it worked. Now they trust you, right? That's the goal. That's the goal. Is I want somebody to be like, it worked. Because when somebody goes, it worked, it's going to stick in their brain and they're going to share it with everyone that they believe it'll help. And that is the outward facing part of the research process that we do. And then you take the responses to those pieces of educational content, or informative content or helpful content, and you start noticing patterns in that, and you say, that is what's going to lead us to creating the paid product, the paid offer, where it's going to save them even more time, even more money, create a bigger result, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I love this idea that you just brought up, that each blog post is a tiny free product to give people kind of a taste of what they could be paying for and getting a lot of value out of. Because I think a lot of people still have a tough time wrapping their minds around like creating a product. When you think about going from a services-based business, which I think probably I don't know if it's the majority of businesses, but a lot of businesses are service-based. They get into the same issue. I mean, I think I'm kind of we're between you and Amy, where we don't like the hamster wheel of services, because once again, it's every time you scale up, you have to hire people, and then like something goes sideways, and there's nothing worse than having to fire people because of that. And, the client doesn't see the consequences. You have to feel it every day. But then also, we were getting frustrated because we were turning a lot of people away, because there's a lot of businesses out there that can't afford our rates and the amount of time it takes to do that research. That research is huge, right?
Totally.
And it takes a lot of hours. And if they're paying you to do it, that adds up. And we're not interns anymore. And they'll look at the estimate and sort of freak out. And this was sort of also the impetus for me was, hey, I've done this a million times. We have processes that we've set up. Now, processes may seem unsexy to a lot of people, but I feel like processes are what you can productize at the end of the day. And so because I've had to train staff over the years, and because I found myself sending the same thing over and over again to clients over the years, that I'm like, wait a minute, all these processes that we have put together, that we've created, are totally productizable. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, first of all, I think processes are sexy, but maybe that's
we need a T-shirt. Processes are
sexy. And I think we'd have a fan club if we put that out into the world.
Yeah.
But I think you're 100% right. If you think about, I think it's something that we see a lot in our students, where they have some component to their work that to them seems easy or obvious because they do it all the time, and because they've put in the work to get able to do it the way they do it, and they don't really think about all the things that it took to get there, when in reality there's always someone who wants to get somewhere near where you are. They may not want to be exactly where you are, but if you start looking at the world through a lens of what are problems that other people have that I have solved, or I could learn how to solve, or that the tools or systems that I've already created could help them solve, then yeah, I think packaging up those processes, templates, kits, those are all absolutely
cheat sheets,
yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. And
checklists.
Those are the kind of things where even if they're not used directly off the shelf, right? There's still I can give you a concrete example of this right now that I'm going through. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around a tool that is kind of gaining popularity called Notion, which is sort of like hybrid wiki database thing. I feel like you'd love it, but I also don't want to send you down the rabbit hole that I've been down. But I'm trying to use it. A lot of people use it as this sort of task management, knowledge management tool. And I have a slightly different need where I'm trying to use it to externalize all the things going on in my head and across all of my projects so that I'll be better suited to bring on help. If I bring somebody into a project, it now takes me several days to orient them to Alex's world, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to do is figure out, how do I use this tool? And so this tool comes with lots of templates and things like that, but the templates are really kind of static and they're already done. And what I really needed was videos of watching other people turn their own worlds and processes into useful bits of the Notion platform. And I watched 3 or 4 videos and I was like, I get it now. And now I'm on this woman who has been recording all of these videos. Her name's Marie Poulin. I'm on Marie's list. Every time she does something cool new with Notion, I hear about it. I'll probably end up buying something from her at some point or hiring her to help me when I get stuck, because I've seen her do the thing that I wanted to learn how to do, and she was able to help me do it the first time. It's fun to even be able to experience this as firsthand as a recipient of the process from the other side of the table. Now I pay a lot more attention to it, and I appreciate when people do it really well, and she's one of them. And I can think of many others, but I think that's really the key, is being able to put yourself in the shoes of someone who isn't where you are. Try and erase your mind of assumptions and expectations. That, like, the worst thing is people say, "Oh, that's so obvious. I shouldn't write about that. Everybody knows that."
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think about Derek Sivers has this amazing, very brief post on his website, sivers.org/obvious. And it's the gist is, things that are the most obvious to you are often the most amazing to somebody else. And by not writing it, by keeping it to yourself, that's an act of selfishness. You're actually depriving somebody else of an opportunity to be amazed, to be able to move forward through their day. And I think if you start reframing the things in your life, like, oh, this is so small, no one's going to care about this. And say, no, let's say this helps one person. Is that not enough to merit taking the time to write it down? I think so.
Yeah,
and that's what I've kind of built our empire on.
Well, I feel like I've built my career on this notion, yeah, and it's more, for me, it wasn't, how can I monetize it? Although that's kind of switching a little bit now. I mean, there's still lots that I give out for free, and I will continue to. But I've always thought, I just learned this really cool thing, and it took me a long time. I would like to help other people by sharing that so that they don't have to go through that same painful, like, hitting a bunch of walls.
That's right.
Because, I mean, and this very much goes right back to the ecosystem of coworking that we've been part of, and everything else that has driven your life, where it's about sharing, because it's that rising tide brings up all boats kind of idea.
The right thing. I think if we're honest about how we got to where we are, any of us, no one did it by themselves. 0% of people.
Yeah, like
I think even the idea of being self-taught is you figured out which other resources to use to learn how to do it. Then you may have, like, hacked and scrapped and trial and errored some things, but no one has built anything of scale or substance or meaning on their own. And so I think the flip side of that is, I just think it's simply the right thing to do, and is to put good things out into the world, not because it earns you a lead, not because it gets you an email subscriber, and not so that you can sell things to people down the road. If you do that, then, like, I don't think that's right either. I think the key is to realize you put things out into the world because you know those things will help people.
Yeah.
Full stop. That's it. And then in a separate mental modality, you realize the people you've helped may want more. And so you present the opportunities to get more and the people who trust you are going to be your best customers. Those things are intertwined, but I think that a lot of times people think about it from the perspective of, I'm going to create a free ebook, and that is how I deliver value into the world. And I'm like, no, the free ebook that you put behind an email capture is not putting value into the world. That's you capturing email subscribers. That's okay, but that's not the same thing. Yeah. And I think a lot of people put these free ebooks out, and then they get low quality subscribers or they get no subscribers. And it's because they skipped the step that comes before that, which is getting out into those communities, showing up in the comments, showing up in the discussions, showing up at the in-person events if they exist, and being there, being a participant, being a contributor, earning the ability to then give out that free thing that becomes the first thing that people want more of. People skip the actual contribution part, the actual delivering value part. Then you earn the ability to trade emails for a PDF or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Absolutely no marketer has been trained to do this.
Well, it's all about taking, right? It's about getting value out of, let's mine value from these communities.
That's right.
Rather than what can we give first. And, my principles of social have always been, you should approach social with what can you give?
Yep.
How can you add value to the conversation? Thinking about what you take out is learning rather than necessarily somehow squeezing it for money or
I think people want to gain attention as quickly as possible, and then strip mine it for whatever they can get, and then whenever they can't get any more out of it, then they move on to the next opportunity to capture attention, strip mine that, and and then I think if an individual and organization finds themselves with diminishing returns every time they find the new ecosystem, that's why. If you invest in the ecosystems that you want to support and you want to, frankly, you can still profit from them. This doesn't preclude you from being quite successful. I've done this now multiple times in multiple different verticals, and to this day, I get more out of it the more I give, but I don't give so that I can get. And I know that's a bit of a mental flip-flop for some folks, but I think that is really the difference. I also think it's why it's very difficult, and I would argue almost impossible, to really give to a community unless you are part of that community. Because otherwise it's obvious to people that the only reason you're giving is to get something. They can sniff it out a mile away.
It's sort of like the perfect example of a Reddit group, right? A Reddit thread. It's you try to, as soon as you can go in and you try to sort of do anything that's not giving back to the community or participating, it's they completely ignore you, or you're kicked out pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And they're very swift at that, for sure. I'm glad that you did mention ecosystems before, because all of this has me thinking that maybe rather than necessarily products, because Indy Hall is a product, but it's also an ecosystem. You've created a ecosystem / what people would call platform for building upon. When I think of some of the most successful companies, truly successful, Shopify, for instance, which I know you used to do a lot of development. You're part of that developer ecosystem at one point. They've grown and grown because they created a really, really solid platform ecosystem for others to grow their businesses on. Not only just their shops, but developers, designers, widget makers, people who would be able to service people coming into Shopify. That whole ecosystem has been really so beneficial. When I think of Slack too, in a way, has created, Slack created a platform, and it's really grown that not only, it's not a communication tool, it's not just a product, it's become this platform for a lot of people. Christopher Penn, who was just on the podcast recently, he's built this amazing marketing analytical marketers Slack group that is so valuable, right? And he doesn't have to do very much because he's invited the right people in, and they have great conversations. And Slack allows for something like that. Sounds like Notion now, the reason it's growing in popularity is same thing. So having built ecosystems yourself, and sounds like that's what that segues me into your most recent project, 10,000K, right? Is that right?
10K Independence.
10K Independence. Sounds like that's what you're doing there.
Yes, it's true. Ecosystem, and I've learned, and again, to sort of take this back to the beginning, I learned a lot of this from you, from early days, and I attribute a lot of my worldview and approach to marketing from things that I learned watching you, and 10,000.
Thank you, and I'll pay you later.
It's true. It's true. I'd say that off the record as well. So I guess backing up a little bit, Indy Hall has had this incredible run, and I'm super grateful to have it, to be a part of it, to get to lead it. We spent a couple of years in the last few years kind of off focus because we had to find a new home. And I won't go into the details of that because it's not really relevant to the conversation. But what is relevant is I realized how much of a distraction focusing on the things that aren't core can be. Focusing on leases and space design and logistics and all these things that I'm good enough at to get them done, but they're not what make me tick, and they're not the reason that Indy Hall exists in the first place. They're the means to an end.
Right.
And so it took a little while to sort of recover from that sort of mindset shift and get back to being able to answer the question of like, what are we doing again? What's my job? What am I good at? What are we working towards? And, you know, when I started Indy Hall in the beginning, I had a pretty clear problem to solve. Like I said before, I don't know who the other people in my community are, and it's too hard to find them. And I found other people who believed the same thing. And so we found each other and created critical mass and continue to find each other and grow and help each other and grow and so on and so forth. 13 years later, the city of Philadelphia, I don't want to say it doesn't have that problem anymore, but solving it is no longer the most important problem. We'll continue to do it. There's other people doing it. They're doing it for their communities. A true ecosystem has blossomed in Philadelphia over the last decade and change, which raises the question, what is the new problem that Indy Hall exists to solve for the next 10 years? And I didn't have a clear answer to that question for a while until late last year. I started thinking about the national response in the U.S. to the Amazon HQ2 initiative nonsense, whatever you want to call it. But for those who were not following along, Amazon, one of the wealthiest companies, if not the wealthiest company in the world, basically pitted cities across America against each other.
And they played everybody like fiddles
to say, hey, we're bringing our East Coast headquarters, our second headquarters will likely be, east of the Mississippi. It's going to be in a city that meets these criteria. And they basically did an open RFP, and they had cities and councils from across America who never had a chance investing time and money into positioning themselves. And frankly, the way I thought about it was, Amazon is led by some of the most ruthless negotiators in the world. Cities and towns are generally run by people who aren't the most ruthless negotiators in the world. And so I know who's going to win. From the start, it doesn't matter who wins.
Amazon.
Whoever wins loses. Amazon has positioned itself to be the only winner in this. So all of that aside, a few things did come out of this. Well, one, they're not in Philadelphia, surprising absolutely nobody. But the conversation led to a few takeaways for me. One was that this big challenge of winning Amazon's heart, or lack thereof, brought together our business community, including some people in our business community who do not play nicely together. Not just don't play, like they actively fight. And they came together to create a pitch that talked about how great Philadelphia was in the context of Amazon coming here. But again, people who don't play nice together, playing nice together long enough to say nice things about Philadelphia because there's a common goal. That's interesting.
Right.
The other really interesting thing was a number that I had been trying to wrap my head around for a long time. Our biggest technology employer in the region is Comcast, who we also don't have a great relationship with. Not even just
anybody does.
Not just me personally, but as a corporate citizen, they strip mine the city. But again, that's a whole other story. But I would look at Comcast and all the attention and support they get from the city and say, how big do you need to be in order to start? Like, how big were they when they started getting attention? How big what's the number of constituents you need to represent in order to start getting the attention. And watching the Amazon HQ2 thing go down, I learned the number, and the number is 50,000. 50,000 jobs is enough to make the mayor and everybody else in the city do backflips for you if you're Jeff Bezos. And so I said, okay, 50,000 is the number. I don't think that number is very big. I mean, it's big, but in the context of a city of millions of people, 50,000 jobs didn't seem big enough to merit massive tax breaks and things like that. But again, if that's the number, cool. That's my number now. I'm bringing 50,000 jobs to Philadelphia over the next 10 years. And here's how we're going to do it. And part of the thesis is that if 50,000 jobs are inherently a good thing for a city like Philadelphia, and I think that's true, one company creating 50,000 jobs is the worst way to do it. The company being Amazon is the worst way to do it. But if we start breaking it apart into what are other ways to generate that number 50,000, and this is the 30 by 500 methodology, where you take a big number and you break it down into a smaller equation by multiplying things against each other.
I thought you said you hated math.
I do. I don't know why I keep naming my things after math equations. But I said, okay, what if we had 5 10,000 person companies? That would be measurably better. 10 5,000 person companies would be better as well, and so on and so forth. If you run that math all the way to the other end of the spectrum, 50,000 entrepreneurs also is not what we need as a city. It's not what any city needs, because people need jobs. People need to be able to get hired into good paying jobs. They need to be able to train with the right skills to get those jobs, so on and so forth. So I found an equation somewhere in the middle, and that number is 10,000. 10,000 people, if our goal becomes to help 10,000 people become sustainably independent over the next 10 years, while 80% of those people will never hire somebody else, and we've got to make that okay, 20% of them will. And some percentage of the 20% who hires their first employee will then hire a second. And a third and a fifth and so on. And when you run our state numbers against that, the math generates roughly 80,000 jobs from those initial 10,000 self-employed people. But nobody's approaching, like, people approach things as like entrepreneurship equals economic growth, but very broadly. And if you look at the way support systems are built, they're all focused on the growth stage, not on the start stage. And if they are focused on the start stage, it's focused on be the next Facebook, create a giant company. When in reality, most people aren't, and this is not to diminish anybody, I'm not really cut out to support, a giant team. I'm barely cut out to support my team of 2. So our approach for 10,000 independents is to help inspire people to create jobs for themselves, which is a totally different way of thinking about entrepreneurship. It's not start a company. It's not even really start a business. It's create a job for yourself. What are the skills you need to serve another individual or business? And teach people how to do that, and do it in a sustainable way, so that when they get to the point where they're doing it, it's not just making enough money to pay the bills each month. It's making enough money to have some savings, to be saving for retirement, to be able to afford healthcare, to be able to take a vacation, to be able to reinvest, to actually for the people that have started. And I know a lot of people go out on their own as a freelancer or consultant, and like, you can pay the bills, but a bad month or two could mean I've got to go get a job again. When I say sustainable independent, I mean one where the quality of life and opportunity that you have as an independent is just as good, if not better, than doing the same thing for a big corporation.
I think you have a similar quote pinned on your Twitter profile right now, which I absolutely love. Like, you can be a freelancer or whatever. You're going out into business, but you can't call yourself an entrepreneur until you create a sustainable job for one person. That's you. And that, I think that's a great way to describe it.
That's exactly right. And so I think, if we reframe entrepreneurship away from the way, the things that are constantly in the news and the media, let's use the same news and media to portray the stories of the solo business owner. There's a great book that I'm listening to right now by a guy named Paul Jarvis, who's also Canadian.
Yeah, he's from Ottawa.
He's from Ottawa, yeah. And he's based out in Vancouver now, but he wrote a book called Company of One that I'm loving and I highly recommend. And it's the same sort of philosophy of encouraging people to think that, it's not growth is bad. It's challenge the default of growth and focus on both systems and processes to get you to the point where you need to be, where if you want to grow, you can, but in a lot of cases, people think the only way to continue is to grow. And that's the default that I think is worth challenging. So,
and I think, I mean, and that's so important. And I know I said that I wouldn't bring up the WeWork stuff, but similarly in this when we're talking about this stuff, right? It's like a lot of us were around doing co-working, creating co-working spaces that still exist and are thriving in different communities around the world, hundreds, if not thousands of them, thousands that we wouldn't even know that maybe like they've touched into the community or the wiki, but they didn't really participate. And they're running like really great. They're paying themselves. They've created that. They're real entrepreneurs. They've created a business that will help them sustain themselves, and maybe they've hired one or two other people. And these are great businesses. A lot of people benefit from being part of those spaces. And this big, embarrassing eyesore comes along and creates like a huge blast. And all of a sudden, that's where everybody's attention goes, and all the reporting on it. I have not seen a single report say, well, they're just like this kind of co-working, but there's a whole other kind of co-working.
Well, here's the thing is like, I think you need to be really, this is another like lesson in business that I've learned is like, I'm very, very, very picky about what I pay attention to. And when it comes to both mainstream and social media about my industry, I read basically zero of it,
right?
Because the day-to-day will only ever frustrate or make me mad. And more importantly, it will never affect me.
Right.
The biggest negative effect that one of these big corporate co-working operators has ever had on the co-working industry was not taking their members. It was distracting everybody from what their core point was. And so the easiest way to deal with that is to just like not pay attention, to pretend it, and not to pretend it doesn't exist, but like to give it zero attention. And unless there's something specific that you aim to learn, that you actually have the ability to implement for yourself that will serve your members or your customers, every minute you spend paying attention to what somebody else is doing, right or wrong, is time you're not paying attention to your members and customers, your community, your customers. So like, even if what somebody else is doing is right, it's still time taken away from your people that matter most. So like, I think like the ultimate act of defiance is like, in my world, they don't exist. Literally, they don't affect us.
For me, and I guess it's like when I think about big businesses versus lots of small businesses that do well, whether it's co-working or outside of that realm, like any business, right? Like there's something like 63% or whatever the U.S. economy is made up of businesses that are like 1 to 10 people or whatever. And that's the U.S. economy is fueled by that. And you're talking about the 10,000K the project that you're working on. Well, 1 or 2 of those businesses, or even 10 of those businesses, fold. They have a bad day, and it's a small amount of people that are affected. Whereas, like, if you only focus on the big guys, sure, they employ a lot, but they also lay off a heck of a lot of people when things go sideways. So it's much better to feed an ecosystem that encourages those 10,000 smaller entrepreneurs rather than one big one.
If you think about, there's a lot of conversation in the physical product development world around biomimicry and building. Even like I was watching this thing over the weekend where they're building robots that mimic the way that birds carry seeds to reforest when forests burn down. Like biomimicry and technology is super interesting to me. I think we need to think about business ecosystems through the lens of biomimicry as well. There is no naturally occurring centralization of power and resources like happens in the mainstream business ecosystem that we've allowed to happen in the mainstream. Like it just doesn't occur in nature, which should suggest that maybe something is going to break. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of some of those things breaking. I don't have predictions for how they'll break, but I also don't believe they'll last forever. So if we're thinking about longevity, which is important to me, at this point, I've sort of built a career around being in a position to do what I want to do and do what I think is right, regardless of what other people are doing. And that's not to, in a sense, to isolate myself from other people, but I do it specifically in a way where I am self-reliant enough that one other person, like you said, going out of business is not going to take me down. At the same time, I'm interdependent enough that if I happen to be the weak link, let's say my business goes out of business, I have a fair degree of confidence that because we're part of this bigger ecosystem, my 10 employees are going to get jobs real fast because I can connect them to fellow employers who do similar or complementary things. And so like nature is the most resilient thing we have to learn from. Why we should be borrowing from those patterns and how we design our business, design our marketing, design our products. That's one of my favorite. Exactly.
Right. And it's like not just nature, but investing. Like if you put all your money in one stock, you're setting yourself up for a potential disaster.
That's right.
So, once again, like I love what you're doing. And you've been doing all of these years. You say that I inspired you in the early days. Well, you've continued to inspire me. And what we do, you always bring me back and ground me when I look to the outside and start doing the compare-itis thing that I'll do. I know other people listening to this are going to feel the same way. They're going to want to follow you. Where can people find you, follow you? Where's the best place to see Alex in action?
Totally. So I'm like you. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I'm Alex Hillman, my first and last name. So say hello. Check me out. I also have been writing about this stuff, co-working, business, and whatnot on my own personal site, which is dangerouslyawesome.com.
Classic.
I started writing that before I knew co-working was going to become such a big part of my life. So it's got the full compendium of me learning how to think about this stuff as well as the discrete lessons. And I still write there to this day, as well as a newsletter on there that you can check out. If you are ever in Philadelphia, check out Indy Hall, come by and say hello. We're at indyhall.org. And since we did talk about stacking the bricks, that's all at stackingthebricks.com. So Amy and I both share, again, articles, lessons from the trenches of building our businesses. That is more focused on the business marketing mindset type lessons and how we help creatives create product businesses for themselves.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. And we'll put a lot of links in the show notes, including a link to that amazing tools post, which is in my bookmarks and probably will be in everybody else's bookmarks after they finish listening to this. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll talk soon.
Yes, very soon.
Yeah. Bye-bye now.
So that was amazing. Thank you very much, Alex, for stopping by and taking time to call us in. So much information that I'm a little bit like, I'm still digesting it.
I'm inspired.
Yeah.
I'm very inspired.
Yeah.
And I think that it's going to actually help us because as we have been mentioning a few times on the podcast lately, we're building a product ourselves called Flywheel. That's PHLY wheel.com. And right now you can actually go there and sign up if you want to know a little bit more about it. Of course, we did not have Alex on the podcast because we had an ulterior motive, but it turns out that it kind of helps fuel that conversation. And if you're interested, if you are looking to bring marketing in-house, or you are a small business and cannot afford an agency, or you just want to update your own skills, we are building products for DIY marketers.
Awesome. Sponsorship message over. No, I'm just kidding. So obviously, thank you very much if you've listened to this far. And if you love the show and want to help us out, please share it with somebody or a few people in your community. We really appreciate it. We're seeing a lot of different things come our way because of the podcast. And it's been really interesting to see it grow and the type of people that are sort of connecting with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. See you next one.